Hi, and welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials. We're going to take a look at some cybersecurity lessons we can learn from this week's ThreatTraq stories. I'm here with Andy Benavides. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing well, Don. Thanks for asking.
Let's talk about this week's stories. Stan brought us a story about a certain kind of flu for Android devices, malware that's coming through text messages. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so Stan's story actually talked about how some people are receiving text messages with links embedded in them. And when they click on that link, a file called an APK is downloaded onto their machine or onto their phone. It actually installs malware that spies on the things that they do and tries to steal information like passwords and credit card information.
Well, I know, again. Let's talk about what advice we can give people. I mean, certainly it has to be about being careful what you click on when it comes to text and unexpected text, right?
Absolutely. It's always a good idea to avoid clicking on things that come through texts. For example, if you get a text message, say from like Netflix or something, telling you that your payment isn't going through, it's generally a better idea to, instead of clicking on the provided link, to actually navigate to Netflix directly in your own browser that you typed in yourself to check on that account status. Most companies won't text you with links embedded in them to solve problems, so it should be a red flag when you receive one.
Let's talk about your story about the GitHub code repository and the vulnerability that researchers have found there.
Yeah, so it's actually a feature, not a bug, to make the distinction. But essentially, GitHub, which is kind of like the biggest code repository on the internet, it's where companies and individual programmers can push their code to so that it sits. It can be public, it can be private, depending on how you have it configured. But essentially, there's a feature that allows you to release that code to the public in sort of a prepackaged format. Well, what the article was describing is some of the files that come alongside those prepackaged, code bits or code files can be modified once they're pushed as a release. And the problem with that is whenever you're doing that sort of modification, it kind of leads the way for attackers to get into that little gap and maybe modify it to make it bad and sort of poison the supply chain, so to speak. So the idea is that somebody who has the access to update a release like that would get compromised through a text message or an email or whatever it may be, and then get into that project and modify its release files to do something nefarious, something bad.
So if one is using GitHub, what can they do to protect themselves while using it?
Well, you want to make sure that anything you download from GitHub is at least relatively trustworthy. And what I mean by that is anybody can go on GitHub and push releases onto their private repositories or public repositories. But, there are official repositories for Microsoft and other, major software companies. I'd say generally it's a good idea to just avoid blanket trusting anything from GitHub. Just because it's on GitHub doesn't mean it's automatically safe. And, there's some more technical things you can do, like checking, hashes of files and whatnot, or avoiding downloading from untrusted sources altogether. But I think a good general rule is just avoid blanket trusting anything that comes from GitHub, and only download things that maybe not know, but you have a reasonable assumption that it is going to be not malware and reasonably safe.
And lastly, John brought us a story about other researchers who have found a privacy leak in Apple AirDrop. What's going on there?
So a research company from Germany actually discovered that two users who are using AirDrop to send information to one another, that communication can actually be intercepted, and certain things can go on with that communication. Some reverse engineering can happen to basically expose the email and the phone number of the parties involved. So it's a data leak, essentially, is what it is. It's important to note that sort of attack does require the attacker to be near you in proximity, and for certain settings like AirDrop to be turned on your phone and engaged in an actual sharing event with another user in order for the attack to go through.
Any advice you want to give Apple users?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that the data that's being leaked here isn't insanely sensitive. It's not passwords or credit card information. It's not the content that you're actually airdropping to another device. But one thing that you can do is simply turn AirDrop off while you're not using it. Many folks use it seldomly. Some folks don't use it at all. I myself use it periodically. So it's not a stretch and it's not particularly cumbersome to just go in and turn it on when you want to use it and then turn it off when you're finished with it. Once it's off, that sort of attack is simply not possible because your phone, it is not talking that language at that time.
Well, thanks for that great advice, Andy. Thanks for being here this week. And if you want to keep up on this advice every week, please like or subscribe below. And if you want to take a deeper look at any of these stories, click on the playlist below. We'll see you next time.